Hello and welcome to 3.0 TV. I am Vishakha Thakur. In a report by Deloitte, it has been predicted that the metaverse industry in India might have an economic impact worth between $79 billion and $148 billion by 2035. So, to have a better understanding of the current scenario of the metaverse industry, its impact on India's economy and future, we have invited Mr. Utkarsh Shukla, who is the founder and CEO of YUG Metaverse. The first Indian wedding in Metaverse took place on this Made in India Metaverse platform. Welcome to 3.0 TV, sir.
Thank you, Vishakha.
It's a pleasure to have you, sir.
Great to be there.
Sir, Metaverse is opening up transformative opportunities, and according to a report by Deloitte, the metaverse industry in India might have an economic impact worth between $79 billion and $148 billion by 2035, as I mentioned. So, what are your views on the same?
See, I think if you look at it from a very higher end, basically on a very top level, you would realize that there is a jump from the 2D internet that we essentially are using. So, for example, the Amazons or the Googles of the world that we are using, there needs to be a sort of a jump from that 2D internet to a 3D internet. And with the advent of, again, 5G has been launched up in India, and a lot of other technologies are coming in, especially phones are also getting much powerful and much better. So now I think basically is a time where a lot of features sort of basically have come together, which essentially sort of have enabled up the conversion of that 2D internet into a 3D internet. And Metaverse essentially stands about that whole 3D internet, where you'll have the experience of shopping not just by scrolling up the products and clicking on buy, but you will have the experience of sort of going into a three-dimensional shop and then sort of experiencing of the products there. So that ways, I think, again, I'm assuming basically this is only by 2035, this essentially is going to grow, because that change or that conversion is anyways imminent. So I think that ways, I think basically we are just at the very beginning and at the very starting of the phase. There are a lot of issues in terms of basically understanding what the user essentially understands, how the user essentially interacts. So post this phase, we'll start seeing up a lot of explosion in terms of the 3D experiences. So this is like the old days of internet that was there. So similarly, we are essentially into that sort of old days for the 3D world.
True. So, I think Metaverse, the 5G is going to be a key to Metaverse. And with India adopting a hard stance on blockchain and cryptocurrencies, do you think the world's second biggest democracy is a conducive place for the growth of metaverse in contrast to countries such as Dubai, Germany, or US?
See, I think that's where somewhere people have to sort of understand that, metaverse, VR, and your entire cryptocurrencies, these sort of have different roles in the ecosystem. So, metaverse can function without a Web3. Obviously, it will be a different sort of a metaverse, basically. So, for example, today, if you look at Roblox, or in fact, what Facebook or Meta basically is also building, they're not using a lot of cryptocurrencies. But what crypto or basically blockchain sort of provides is a decentralization. Again, basically, for example, we are using blockchains to provide decentralization. But again, crypto is one format or one small use case for the entire blockchain technology. So decentralization is going to be the key, and blockchain enables that. And I think basically blockchain will play a huge role in the metaverses. Crypto, obviously, it's not just in India, basically across the world. Basically, we are facing a lot of companies who are essentially sort of hitting hard on the Web3 and the crypto market. But yes, basically somewhere down the line, I think again, Indian government is releasing up the digital rupee and a lot of other CBDTs.
Yes.
So I think those will sort of fill that place and sort of basically create a system.
So, since you mentioned that companies are betting big on metaverse, so countries are too betting big on metaverse. For example, if we talk about Dubai, so Dubai is becoming the center of Web3 with the country having its own metaverse strategy. So, where do you see Dubai in the next 5 years?
See, Dubai, obviously, I mean, at a country level, they have the transformational plan for not depending on fossil fuels and instead basically focusing on the new upcoming technologies. And I think basically, and again, a lot of other countries also are sort of basically taking a cue and sort of investing up into a lot of these new age technologies. Because again, I mean, basically, as you mentioned up initially, that the whole there is a entire bigger market which essentially is going to come in. So obviously, whichever country essentially sort of takes the cue and sort of basically jumps, obviously they will have a upper hand and a leverage in terms of the technology.
So, since you are an early adopter, what do you think are the advantages for early adopters of Metaverse?
See, early adopters sort of have, again, both ways basically. We essentially get to understand what the customer wants. And again, basically, there is a lot of chance for sort of experimentation, sort of user experiences experimentation, and a lot of those technology experimentations. And again, mostly in most of the cases that you see, those early adopters are the ones basically who sort of set up a standard where basically, which essentially again basically the rest of the community follows. So for example, I mean, we essentially, I think it has been more than almost like 8 months or 9 months basically we have been working into the market. We have been doing a lot of activities. We have got a lot of hands-on understanding in terms of what the user essentially wants, what works in the metaverse domain, what doesn't works. Because again, I mean, on paper everything looks nice, but the moment you essentially go into the market, you essentially sort of get that background, I mean, feedback from the users and the community and everybody, that in terms of what makes sense. So I think that is something which essentially sort of gives a leverage. And again, basically, if you look at the top companies of the world, basically the Googles and the Amazons, they are again one of those early adopter companies basically which were there. So yeah, I mean, basically that essentially gives you a leverage in terms of understanding the market.
So, you claim that YUG Metaverse organized Asia's first Metaverse wedding. Can you share details on user base, your projects, and some other commercial data on your project, including investments and tie-ups?
See, I mean, at YUG Metaverse, we essentially are focusing on a couple of aspects. There's one aspect which we essentially focusing on is primarily, I mean, again, experiences are experiences like the wedding and Holi and a lot of those experiences that we created up were the areas that we essentially got an understanding that how the user interacts with the new technology. Especially if you look at gaming in India, I mean, while there are a few games that have done very well in the past few years, but again, gaming as a broad range subject basically is pretty restrictive in India as of now. I mean, basically, there are mobile games which basically have sort of worked, but again, the PC games and a lot of different genres have not sort of worked. So, with that, what we have done is basically we have sort of understood the market basically. Post that, now we essentially are sort of focusing on a couple of things. One is basically we essentially focusing on creation of a tool where, I mean, again, it's not just that we should sort of come in. There is a gap in the market where somebody who essentially doesn't has any experience in the 3D content or those sort of areas, or metaverse development sort of an area, they essentially should have a very, very simple tool that they can sort of utilize and create up content using that. So that is one area that we are working very aggressively on that. And we essentially have onboarded a few creators also who essentially are using the tool and sort of creating up the marketplace. So metaverse is all about that. It's not that you essentially are the creator or the one who essentially is creating the experiences, but it's more about a platform where a lot of other people are sort of coming and creating up the experiences. So we are directly working with a few companies, and we are also sort of enabling the community to sort of come in and sort of uh, create content, and then basically in a very easier to learn sort of a fashion. Because I mean, if you go into a typical game development cycle, I mean that essentially has very sort of a long and a tedious journey. So we essentially want to make that less, so that basically as a platform, I mean, there are a lot of creators who essentially are creating content, and then basically again the users which are sort of coming up and using up the content. So that is the way that we're essentially looking at. And I think basically in the initial phases, the creator community is also something which essentially sort of has, I mean, will have a lot of value in terms of getting up them on the platform.
So, so how do you think the digital identities are going to play a role in shaping the metaverse forward?
See, I think digital identities are a very key element of your digital presence. So till now, basically, if you, I mean, again, from a very broad perspective, if you look at it, I mean, in most of the websites that you go, there used to be the option of this login from Facebook and login from Google, because I mean, those two were sort of have sort of basically focused on being up a digital identity provider. Similarly, I think in Web3 or the decentralized world, I think somewhere down the line, there would be a lot of decentralized identity providers, which essentially will enable a couple of things. One is basically, uh, with those, you will be able to sort of control the access of your data. It's not that basically you essentially log in somewhere and then basically the application is sort of getting up all of your data, or basically you're freely accessing up the data for the other person. So that control and that ownership, because the moment we essentially are moving in Web3 or a decentralized world, a lot of asset and content will also sort of become up a ownership sort of a focus. So for example, I mean, again, a very simple example. So for example, let's say, I mean, a lot of people would have played snake games on their Nokia 1100s. They would have achieved a lot of high scores basically. But today, if their phone is not there, nobody knows that how much high scores that they have got. But now, basically, with a decentralized identity, if you are able to link your high scores to that identity, so today, if you do not even have that phone, even if you do not have that game installed, at least you have those high score achievements with you. So I think digital identities will play sort of a very key role into this area.
Wow. So, with all this, there are some critical issues involved too, whether we talk about cyber security, identity theft, or data security, network vulnerability, and others. So, how do you think can we tackle these issues in future?
See, I think there are two parts to it. One is basically, obviously, there are, since a lot of things are built on existing tech stacks, so a lot of those inherent vulnerabilities do come in. For example, I mean, your application will end up using some sort of an API, some sort of a communication methodology. So a lot of those security and those sort of aspects and those sort of issues anyways do creep in. And again, basically for them, there is a lot of things that are being done. But again, along with that, since we are doing, I mean, since it's a sort of a very uncharted territory that the metaverse and the 3D world basically sort of creates up. So I think obviously a lot of those issues will also come in. But again, I think basically that's where we'll have to be vigilant in terms of making sure that the security and especially the privacy. I mean, I think basically privacy is also one of the major concerns along with security, wherein basically, I mean, the user consent and privacy, and a lot of those things will also sort of have to happen. So I think that's where a lot of things will anyways emerge. And the moment basically there is a thriving market, again, basically there will be a lot of, I mean, old as well as new solution providers and people who will sort of emerge to essentially create even a business out of it.
So, metaverse is the future of internet, basically. But what do you think is going to be the future of metaverse?
Uh, See, fundamentally, I mean, again, I mean, if you look at it, I mean, 2D and 2D converts into 3D. Your so post 3D, obviously, I mean, there's a little scope basically, but the future would be more in terms of how you are consuming content. So, for example, you earlier, I mean, basically 10 years before, basically people were consuming content from laptops or from PCs at a distance of, let's say, 1 feet or 2 feet. Today they are consuming content from mobile at a distance of 10 centimeters, 20 centimeters. I mean, with VR headsets, they are consuming content at a distance of 2 centimeters. Uh, they now basically, I think basically overall, there is also the whole area of brain machine interface. So I think probably in the next 10 years, basically, we might not even have to open our mouths to talk. We might communicate just by thinking with each other. I think basically those are areas basically which will have a lot of focus basically.
All right. So thank you so much, sir, for being on 3.2 TV and sharing your views and knowledge with our viewers. It was really great having you on the show.
Sure. Thanks a lot.
So this was Mr. Utkarsh Shukla, founder of YUG Metaverse. He gave us an insight to the current scenario of the metaverse industry and its future. Keep watching 3.0 TV for more such interviews. Do not forget to like, share and subscribe to our channel. And for instant updates, do press the bell icon. This is me, Vishakha Thakur, signing off.